Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and can you imagine a world in which we didn't have history, in which we didn't have information or understandings of things that happened in the past, and that we blindly would go on through life repeating all of the mistakes that had been done previously, and not keeping history? Therefore, the following generations would do the same over and over again. I'm fascinated by history, and I am thankful from the time and the dawn of man and civilized man, we have captured history and written about history and learned from history. And hopefully that understanding and that learning will guide us to do things in a better way when we have the opportunities to do them. So often today in this modern world, we speak about history in a pejorative form. We seem to be totally against so much that took place in history. And history is not pretty. History has never been pretty. And if history is pretty, it's not a very accurate history, because the thing is that history comes with the good and the bad. And sometimes great things happened through an understanding of history and through an understanding of what they saw was wrong, and they fixed it. And that's an important thing. And that's something that we should all be aware of, and that's what we should all study. And I think it's an important thing for students and for children and for adults and for senior citizens and for people that are trying to figure out what to do with their time, to study some history and learn. And what you discover with history is that there's nothing new. For thousands of years, we have contemplated and thought and said and composed and argued and fought over the same things. And fortunately, at times, we learn from the history. And so often, at times, we do not. I'm sitting at my desk right now. I have an old secretary desk, and I like to sit here, and I have a few choice books in this secretary. And with this, I can look and study and look up things and look at things in their time. This is an important part of our history that sometimes seems to get lost. History is under attack in this modern age. People who lived 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 1,000 years ago, didn't live like we do today. In fact, they would never fit in today's society. Of course, if you reverse the situation, none of us would fit in their society either. You see, time is like tracks on a phonograph record. Even that's getting to be a historic term, and a lot of times people get confused by that. But as a record plays, the grooves change. And what's the information at that time is very different than what was playing before, and what was playing before won't fit in what is playing at the moment. You know, going all the way back to the beginnings of printing, you know, the Gutenberg Bible and things like that. And of course, in Korea, they were the first to have metal type. And in China, they were the first to have glass type and ceramic type. And they were able to print. And once printing came into the fore, it changed society, it changed people, it changed our understandings, it changed knowledge. In many ways, you might say that the only thing I can think that would equal the ability to start printing books was the internet. It had the same profound effect. You know, here's an early book. This is from 1626, and it's a history. It's written in Latin, but it's taking a number of Roman histories from the past and adding them in. And in fact, what they used to do years ago with a lot of these old books in the, let's say, in the 16th and in the early 17th century is they take several books, put them all together, wrap them in vellum, which was a very early form of leather on books, and that way it's small. You can carry it. You can fit it in your pocket when you travel. You can read. And the world was at your fingertips. That's pretty amazing when you think about it. And that went on for years. I mean, this is a later book, of course. What year is this one? This is 1827, 200 years later. This same kind of format. This is Sturm's Reflections, which was very, very popular. And it's really quite a fascinating read. I've read through it. And I like to just read little parts of it because it's wonderful information, wonderful thoughts, wonderful ideas. But you know something? When you read a history today, and as I mentioned before, a lot of times we're treating history in a rather pejorative form. We're disapproving lots of parts of it. And there are, as I said before, bad parts, sure. That's history. That's why it's called history. And that's why we try to change it. We learn from the history. If we look at the War of 1812 in the year 2021, we will have a slightly different take than they would have at this. This is the War of 1812. In fact, it was published in 1815 by one of the negotiators dealing with the Treaty of Peace with England. I think it was Jonah Russell was his name, and it's all the important documents dealing with the correspondence between Great Britain and the United States. Fascinating stuff. We don't see a lot of things like that in our histories today. We have the story, we have parts and pieces of this, but at the whim of the writer, at the whim of the historian, they decide what is useful for you to read. And I often find, to tell you the truth, I like to look at the earlier books and read all the stuff that a lot of histories don't contain. Because that tells you a lot more. A lot of times, it's the things that cast to the side. You know, as I have mentioned before, talking about history, you know, I like to think of history and our understandings of history sort of like taking a cup, a net, okay, where water can pass through. Let's just say history is this dirty mug of water, and we pour it through, and the water goes right through. But there are bits and pieces that don't make it through the strainer. And a lot of times, those are the fascinating parts of the history. They're not important historically, but they are such an important window into the time period. And that's a very important thing in understanding our history. Because to tell you the truth, we're not teaching history as we really should anymore. History is designed to be taught to fit tests. You know, we don't sit down and talk about history and dissect it and spend lots of time on it. I think from the time children are in the first and second grade, they should be doing history already. They should be learning their history. They should be learning speeches. They should be learning why things happened. You know, and you could understand as a 6-year-old or as a 7-year-old, you're already facing crises and situations. And you can read about history of people who dealt with that kind of stuff. Because there's nothing bad about learning history. It's a window. it's probably one of the most fascinating and most important fuels for that noggin up here. You know, here's a book I like to read. This was Morse's Revolutionary War. It's kind of like the American Revolution. But what's really cool about this book is Morse wrote John Adams and had questions. And so John Adams, there's about 6, 7 letters from John Adams in here where he's talking about that revolutionary period. And that's really fascinating. And as I said, I love new histories too. And I have tons of new history books, new and fascinating things. But you want to learn a little bit of everything. You want to touch some of the old stuff. Here's a fun thing for me. These books, and I've mentioned them before, but I'm just so enamored with these books. I found them a long, long time ago. And they have meant a lot to me, especially in the year 2020 when I discovered their true story. This is a book on, let's see if I can open this up so you can see. This is lectures in rhetoric and oratory by John Quincy Adams. And John Quincy, of course, you know, the son of John Adams, and of course was an ambassador, was president, was congressman, author, peace negotiator. In fact, there is very little he didn't do. These books were published, and of course, it wasn't widely published. It was the lectures that he gave at Harvard, John Quincy, and his students wanted copies, so they published them. And a lot of copies were brought to the old house, and John Adams' son-in-law, who was William Stephen Smith, was given these when he stayed at the old house. And of course he brought them with him to Congress. And he was George Washington's aide-de-camp. He was one of his aides-de-camps. And he was very close to George Washington and was very much involved with George Washington in his first term as president. And so just to sit and hold these, to read them is fascinating because John Quincy Adams goes through all the history of speeches and talks and conversations. And all of it's just so incredibly important. And you really need to steep yourself in history if you can do it. Find copies of books. Look at stuff. What's this here? This is kind of interesting. I pulled this down. I forgot about it. This is the history of the British exhibition in Egypt. This is when the French had found the Rosetta Stone and the English took it, of course. And this is where a lot of that stuff took place. This is from 1803. This was published. This is an American edition. It was originally published in England. And it's all dealing with the events in Egypt, which were very, very important in the field of archaeology and also in the field of learning and understanding hieroglyphics. You know, we have to understand that the understanding of hieroglyphics from ancient Egypt is relatively recent. It's only been a little less than 200 years since we could read them. And of course, the actions that took place here had a role in it. And of course, that's important. Everything is history. Everything that we read, everything we study, what we talk about. 5 minutes later, it's history, you know, if you think of it that way. But what I want to say to you is the importance of history, that we should surround ourselves with it, because it is such an important influence for us, and such an important educator for us, because history never stops teaching. Never. And what we read and what we learn in the various books, writings, essays, etc., that have been written over the past few thousand years are so vitally and amazingly important. And I would encourage parents, I would encourage teachers, I would encourage uncles, aunts, grandparents to push, to foster an interest in it. Because, talk to lots of people about history and they sit there and say, oh, I hate history. I had to take it. That's because your teacher wasn't very good. History can be fascinating. History can be as funny as you can imagine. I mean, you can have a rip-roaring time. When I taught, there was always a lot of laughter in the class. And you know something? Those kids learned. And a number of them went to university to study to become historians. That makes me very, very proud that I was able to give the gift of loving history and learning history and sharing history to a new generation that will love, that will teach, that will share, generations yet unborn. Because that's the whole idea, if you think about it in closing here, when you teach that you're influencing a generation you'll never live to see the results of. And that's very important. And that's what all of these books have done. These people have turned long since to dust. They're long gone. No one's alive from this time. But their influence, their knowledge, their passion reaches new generations, young ears, old ears, and changes the paths of their lives. So today, when you see all the news and you see how history is being, in a more modern word, dissed, we should understand the fact that, yes, history can be offensive. History can be a problem. History can be an absolute fiasco. But we can learn from it. And that's the most important thing in the world. I fear for coming generations because we are becoming somewhat historically illiterate. And that love for history is not being totally shared by lots of teachers, by lots of educators, by lots of people. Who wants to hear about this nonsense, this old stuff, this old crap? And they did bad things, and yes, they did. And they rectified them as the best they could. So, my little talk on the relevance, the importance, the amazing parts of history. History is important. History is such an important part of who and what we are. And I hope that as time goes on, maybe there'll be a new surge, a new desire, a new want to expand our knowledge and understanding of history. So that's all I wanted to say. It's a pleasure speaking to you folks. I haven't had an opportunity, I had knee replacement surgery, and so that's taken up some time, and I've been in a lot of pain and not moving too well, and I had complications with it, so I have shared a lot of recordings and things like that, but hopefully I can talk more soon. All right? So thank you so much. Have a great day. And read some history.